everyone, my name is Priya and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be painting this still life using acrylic paints on paper. Now, this is the reference photo that I'm going to be painting. This is a still life. It's actually a royalty-free reference photo that I got, I think from Pixabay. And I was really excited to use this reference. I found it about maybe a year or two ago, and I wanted to try painting it, but I was so intimidated by the different textures because there are so many different textures for this, and I was afraid that I won't get it right. But now I just decided one morning I'm going to paint it this way, and I want to try it out and see if it works out good enough. If it doesn't, I'll learn something from it. So I just went ahead with it. So that's just something to remember. Try out different things. Try out things that even you feel are challenging for you. It's very important for you to build your skills as an artist by trying to draw different textures. It helps you develop your skills and also your different subjects you draw. Like this is a still life, which is something I used to draw a lot with graphite, but not so much with paint. So this was something different for me. So I started off with an initial sketch with a water-soluble graphite pencil, and I just got everything correctly and accurately placed on paper. It did take a while to get the initial sketch down, but once I was done with that, then I started working with once I got the sketch done, I started working with the acrylic paints. Now, I haven't really used acrylic on paper. This is mixed media paper, but I haven't used acrylics before much on paper. I think I've used them once or twice in a sketchbook, but the sketchbook was gessoed if I'm not mistaken. But this was actually using it on mixed media paper just as it is. And I must say it was so nice to work on this paper. Like I said, all the supplies will be listed in the description box below, but I really enjoyed using this paper and it works so well with my acrylics. So I used different brushes. I'm using a filbert brushes to create that background with 2 layers of brown paint, and I'm varying the different colors and keeping it darker and lighter. I'm not really worried too much about the background. I just want to get a background for a wall, and then I use the different browns to create that wood effect on the paper with different browns on my paintbrush with the acrylic paints. So those were some of the textures that I already created, the background wall and the wood that the objects are placed on for the still life. So now I am working on the leaves for the flowers. Now remember, leaves have got shadows, they're overlapping one another, so there'll be a variety of different colors. So I have the darkest greens for the darker shadows, and I've got some like mid greens or mid-tone greens for the leaf itself, and then the highlighted areas with the lighter green. And then with the flowers, you can see I'm adding in the flowers. I'm just painting them in with a pink, and then obviously it's a sort of a pink magenta, and I've used some darker areas. I painted with a little darker mix so that it looks a bit more with more purple, so it looks a bit more shadow with shadow areas. And now I'm adding the white of the tulips. The tulips have got white on them, so I'm just adding that to my piece. Now the other textures that I'm working on is there's a glass jar that the flowers are in with metal handles, rope around the brim of the jar. There's a glass bottle with a cork next to it with spilled out with the coffee beans that spilled out of the bottle. And then there's a wooden coffee grinder, but the top part of the coffee grinder, the handle is wood, the box is wood, the drawer where there's ground coffee beans, the ground powder there, as well as the brass part of the coffee grinder, which is above the wooden box. So there's a lot of different textures that I had to take into consideration and try to capture on this piece, which was so exciting. At the same time, it was a bit nerving initially when I started with it, but as I worked on it, it just went from one thing to the other, and I started working on one section to the next section, and it just really all came together. And I really was looking closely at my reference photo. That's very important when you're working on a painting, to look at your reference photo closely, study it, and just really try to interpret it the best you can. And especially if you're painting realistically, you need to look at those highlights and shadow areas. Like now you can see I added a bit of a gray to the wood. That's the kind of the wood what it looked like in the reference photo, and it makes it look a bit more like light is hitting this table. So I worked on the coffee grinder and added a base layer, and then now I'm starting to refine. I refined some of the details on it, and I added some of the darker areas. But I'm trying to create that texture of the different, the kind of texture for the wood, and then I'm refining those darker areas and the patterns on the wood. So you can see I'm just putting in the also the shadow areas where the drawer is pulled out, as well as the handle, and I'm adding a bit of the highlights. I'm going to come through and add more later, but I just want to get an idea of what it's where it's going and how it's going to look, and try to get it just to look as much as the reference photo as possible, because I want a realistic still life. So that's what I'm aiming for. So now, since I've got some dark brown on my brush, I'm just adding all the shadow areas on the wood where all the items are laying, like the flowers, the bottle, even the coffee beans. I'm adding the darker areas of the coffee beans, even inside the bottle as well. I'm adding the dark coffee beans. And then I'm starting to work on the wooden handle of the coffee grinder. Now the coffee grinder, the top part is brass, but you'll see I'm adding a lot of dark brown to it. It's going to come through and look more realistic as I'm adding layers later and blending more. So at the moment, I'm just adding all the dark shadow areas and also the darker areas for that brass area, as well as the wooden handle. I'm just now refining some of those the lines between the different wood panels. And then now I'm just adding a bit more shadows for the coffee grinder now, as well as for the coffee beans that have spilled out. Now, coffee beans are really difficult to paint, so I just had to make something look similar to it. It's not easy to paint at such a small scale. This is an A4 page, so it is quite tiny to draw all the grains. So I had to just give the impression of the grains. So now I'm painting the glass bottle with the coffee beans, and the glass bottle, I used some gray, and now I'm using a lighter gray mix just to create that highlights and shape of the bottle to give it the look of a glass bottle. Even with the glass jar at the back, I'm doing the same thing. I'm adding some white mixed with a bit of gray just to create those, even some white I'm using just to create that effect of the metal of the handles, as well as the glass of the jar, and also the rim of the jar as well, where the flowers are. Just want to add some of that. And then I'm also adding some of the darker areas where the little rope is tied or string is tied around the brim of the jar. Now I'm just adding a variety of different browns to create those textures of the coffee beans, because some are lighter, some are darker, some look more reddish brown, some are in shadows. So I'm just adding that, and then I'm working on the cork. I added the shadows and I added a bit more of that fuzzy or gritty texture that it has. And now I moved on to the brass part of the coffee grinder, and you can see I'm now adding a bit more of darkening up the shadows and blending in those yellow ochre and adding the highlights. That's what will make it look like brass. So remember, the highlights are very important. Even for the handle of the coffee grinder, you can see it's wooden, but I wanted to really make it look like shiny wood. So I added that highlights where the light is hitting it, and that really makes such a difference, because you can actually see that looks like a brass part of the coffee grinder, the wooden part, and you can see the handle is different as well. So that's really important when you are working on creating a realistic painting. Pay close attention to your reference photo, and highlights and shadows are really important. Your shadows must be dark enough and the highlights must be light enough. Now I'm just removing the washi tape from around the painting to have that clean edge. And I must say, this was a process that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed painting the still life and learning all these different textures, and I'm so happy with the results, as well as I enjoy the process a lot. That's really something I really enjoyed, and I think this is one of my favorite paintings. So my advice to you is, if there's a new medium you want to try, or if there's a new subject matter you want to try painting, whatever it is that you want to try, don't be afraid to try. Just go in and try it. But you'll be surprised. Maybe it'll turn out better than you expected, and you'll be really proud of the piece. So just go ahead and try anything that you want to try new. Just go ahead with it. So I guess that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, don't forget to like and share. Feel free to comment below, and don't forget to subscribe. Till the next one. Bye.